Welcome to the Folker Lab podcast. Today we're going to talk about whether intelligence analysis should be more like jazz improv or more like doing your taxes. You're listening to the Folker Lab podcast, where we explore how people think, decide, and lead with integrity. This show is for intelligence professionals, military leaders, and anyone who's ever stared at a problem or a pile of information and thought, now what? I'm Robert Folker. I spent my career in Air Force intelligence and wrote my master's thesis at the National Intelligence University, or NIU, on how to actually make intelligence analysis better, not just louder. That thesis turned into the paper we're talking about today, Intelligence Analysis in Theater Joint Intelligence Centers, an experiment in applying structured methods. Now, if that title sounds a little like Ambien in print form, don't worry. I'm going to keep this light, practical, and yes, even a little fun. Let me start with what the paper is. It's a distilled version of my NIU master's thesis, published as an occasional paper by what was then the Joint Military Intelligence College. I went out to 4 Unified Command Joint Intelligence Centers and ran a controlled experiment to see if a simple structured technique could actually improve qualitative intelligence analysis. Why should you care? Because we've spent billions improving collection, satellites, sensors, you name it, while most analysts are still expected to turn that flood of data into insight, mostly by winging it. The result is what I call analysis paralysis, a lot of activity and not necessarily a lot of clear thinking. My basic question was simple. If you give everyday general analysts one straightforward structured method, do they actually do better than if you just tell them, use your best judgment? Inside the intelligence community, there's a long-running bar fight over whether analysis is an art or a science. On the art side, people say, there are just too many variables, especially in political and military warning problems. You can't meaningfully quantify all of it. Trying to turn this into math is pseudoscience. Humans and foreign leaders are often irrational, so scientific models based on rational behavior will mislead you. And the best analysts use pattern recognition and intuition built over years of experience. They see the shape of a situation, not just the pieces. Now, on the science side, people will argue you don't have to capture every variable. You just need the key ones, organized logically. And structured methods help you figure out which information actually matters and how it strongly points towards one hypothesis versus another. And maybe most importantly, they leave a trail. You can show someone how you got from raw reporting to your conclusion, rather than just saying, trust me, I've got a feeling. My conclusion in the paper is that this either-or framing is a bad question. Qualitative intelligence analysis works best as a combination of art and science, intuition plus a clear framework that forces you to confront your own assumptions and the evidence. A quick example. Think about a commander deciding whether an adversary is about to attack. Pure art is, I've seen this before. My gut says yes. Pure science is a giant Bayesian model. What I tested was something in between, a simple hypothesis testing method where you list possible explanations and score how each piece of evidence lines up. You still need intuition, but now it's disciplined, not free range. The research problem starts with a basic imbalance. Collection has exploded and analysis hasn't kept up. So a few points from the paper. Technology dramatically expanded our ability to collect information. But the community did not invest at the same level in analysis or in teaching analysts how to use structured methods. Only a small fraction of the overall intelligence budget, about 6% at the time, went to analysis, and even less to developing analytical expertise. Many attempts to fix intelligence focused on reorganizing or adding training in non-analytic subjects, instead of changing how analysis itself is done. Meanwhile, history gave us a list of painful analytic failures. The failure to anticipate North Korea's invasion in 1950, where no real analysis accompanied the raw data. The short notice warning before the Tet Offensive, where we missed the where, when, and why until the last minute. and surprise over the fall of the Shah of Iran and over Saddam Hussein's behavior, and later surprise over India's nuclear tests. And of course, who can forget the failure to predict 9/11? We also had cases where more structured quantitative techniques, like the factions Polycon work on political forecasting by the CIA, produced not necessarily more accurate, but more specific and less ambiguous judgments than purely intuitive forecasts. Now, here's the irony. Many policymakers do their own analysis and sometimes distrust analysts' opinions, especially when those opinions come from people junior to them who can't show their work. If you want to be taken seriously by decision makers, you need more than a hunch and a nicely formatted slide. Now, let's talk about the fun part, the experiment. No lab coats, but I did leave my office. I went to 4 Unified Command Joint Intelligence Centers, or JICs: the U.S. Special Operations Command, U.S. Central Command, U.S. Southern Command, and the U.S. Joint Forces Command, which then was called the Atlantic Command. From each JIC, I got a group of intelligence analysts, real people with real workloads. We randomly split them in 2. A control group, they used their normal intuitive approach, and an experimental group. They got about an hour of training in one structured technique, hypothesis testing, based on Morgan Jones's Thinker's Toolkit. Both groups then faced the same 2 qualitative scenarios. In scenario 1, it was a deception-heavy military problem based on German intelligence issues before the Normandy invasion. It was modified so they wouldn't recognize it, and analysts had to say where and how the enemy would attack. In scenario 2, it was a political military intentions problem based on a North Korea case. Was the adversary generally seeking peace, using peace as deception, or just continuing business as usual? Everyone had the same map, the same evidence, the same time limits, and answered as individuals. Answers to the key questions in each scenario were scored simply as correct or incorrect. And I used Fisher's exact probability test to compare the groups statistically. A quick twist. I also collected demographic data, rank, years of experience, education level, and service, to see if those, rather than the structured method, explained any differences. Here's the punchline. On scenario 1, the more complex Normandy-based deception problem, the experimental group did not significantly outperform the control group. With only about an hour of training and 6 different hypotheses to juggle, most analysts struggled to apply the method well enough to gain an edge. On scenario 2, the simpler 3 hypothesis, peace versus deception versus business as usual problem, the experimental group did significantly better. The probability that this difference was due to chance was under the 0.05 threshold I set. In other words, with a modest amount of structure, average analysts produced better qualitative judgments than their peers relying on intuition alone. Several important points from the findings. Rank didn't explain the difference. Officers and enlisted, civilians and military performed similarly once you controlled for the method used. Neither did years of experience. Analysts with more than 10 years did not automatically beat those with less than 10 if they weren't using structure. Nor did education level or service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. None of those factors showed statistically significant impact on the key questions. One interesting side effect, the first scenario may have primed analysts in the control group to see deception everywhere. Having just dealt with a deception problem, some appeared biased toward assuming deception again in scenario 2, even when the evidence pointed toward sincere peace moves. Those using the hypothesis testing matrix seemed better able to stay anchored in the evidence, not their emotional hangover from scenario 1. So, what does this all actually mean? Well, even a basic structured method can measurably improve qualitative intelligence analysis in at least some real-world style problems. You cannot assume that rank, time in service, or degrees automatically translate into better analysis. Method matters. 1 hour of training is not enough to make people masters of a complex technique, but it's enough to show that there's real value in structured thinking. And perhaps more importantly, structured methods don't replace intuition, they discipline it. You still decide what hypotheses to consider and how to rate the evidence, but you do it in a way others can see, critique, and learn from. So where does this leave us now? Well, if you're an analyst, The takeaway is that I'm too busy to use a method may actually be code for I'm too busy to get better. A simple tool like hypothesis testing can help you avoid confirmation bias, over-reliance on your first impression, and the tendency to see deception in every shadow. If you're a leader, the message is that improving analysis is not just about reorganizing your shop or buying another collection system. Teaching and enforcing the use of a small set of structured methods may do more for the quality of your intelligence than your next hardware purchase. In the next episode, I'll talk about how artificial intelligence and large language models may be shaping analysis. Thank you for listening to the Folker Lab podcast. If you enjoyed this, share it with someone who still thinks analysis is just skimming reports and going with your gut.